All right, all right. So we're going to get ready and start introducing our next speakers here. Just a show of hands, is everyone enjoying B-Sides Tampa so far? All right, let's get some good energy here for our next speakers who are coming to discuss with us finding secrets in PDF files. So firstly, we have Mr. Kenny Brown. Kenneth Brown is a staff technical account manager supporting federal customers at VMware USA, formerly holding a senior consultant and program manager role working with DoD customers. And then we also have his counterpart, Nikita. Nikita is a researcher focusing on privacy issues revolving around data archival, sources anonymization, and counterforensics. Nikita's focus is on security training, digital document, and video forensics, and OSINT. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to the gentleman here.
Thank you so much. Alrighty, folks, so I know you're all probably tired of looking at slide decks for the last 5-ish hours, so what we decided to do today is instead do a series of live demos of actually jumping right in and going through. I think we have 3 or 4 PDFs to look through, but keeping in mind that this is a live demo, things don't always go according to plan, just sometimes the best plan, so please bear with us. But let's go ahead and jump in. So what we'll be talking about today is how to find various hidden stuff that PDF producers usually don't want you to find or don't even expect you to be able to find. And so right here, we'll start with a little sample file we made, and then we'll move on to some real world examples. So here we have our title slides. So we have a PDF. What is the first thing that you do when you see a redaction? Does anyone know? This doesn't require any kind of basic editing or any complex features. See a hand. Exactly. Try to highlight it and select the text. So here we go. We can go ahead and copy the text. We don't see anything here. But let's go ahead and paste it into a text editor. Yeah.
We'll get there.
Alrighty. And see. Right, when we paste the text, we see text right away. Of course, other more convoluted PDFs will not have this kind of thing enabled. Usually what will happen is if you try in a more sophisticated redaction, what will happen if you try to copy and paste the text is the text will not paste, either because the document doesn't have the permissions to do so, or because there is no underlying text underneath. And the next feature to do in that case is, and again, we're using whatever the latest version of Acrobat is, so things will be a little different, and we'll also explain in a little bit why we're using Acrobat and not a slew of other available PDF editing tools. But in Acrobat, we could go ahead and analyze the document content structure. And if you don't see this little icon on the right, you need to make sure that you enable showing content, because by default, Acrobat hides that from you because they obviously don't really expect you to go and start analyzing the document. But if we start analyzing the content, what the content feature does is it breaks down all the individual image blocks and text blocks in a PDF, right? And this is kind of the preliminary area where if you do something basic like copy or try to highlight the text and you don't find anything, the next thing to do is to start digging into the PDF structure, right? And so here we see, for example, that our text block is unredacted in the PDF structure, and so the word secrets is, of course, immediately apparent that it's there. We also see that there's a number of images in the PDF, and that's interesting because at first glance we would think that there's only one image, right? But actually the way that this poorly redacted document was done is that the black redaction bars were treated as images. This will be significant in just a second. And we can highlight the image and see what is what. And after we pick the image, so it looks like the central one is the one we want to look at, we could go ahead and edit the image, but before we do that, we want to make sure that in Acrobat, you pop over to Preferences, into the Content Editing panel, and make sure that you select an image editor. It doesn't need to be Photoshop, it could be GIMP, or any number of editors, just as long as you have an editor set up. But let's go ahead and see what happens if we want to edit the image. Oh, the unredacted original conveniently pops up. So that's one way of approaching this kind of thing, is to open up the content structure. The other way of approaching it is if we look at PDF tools. So PDFs traditionally are not meant to be edited, right? And we can use that to our advantage because those who produce PDFs often don't expect us to be able to edit and manipulate the data inside the PDF. But in fact, we do have rudimentary, but still practical for our purposes, editing functions in a PDF. So once we go to the editing tab, we can now select the different elements, and we can just start moving them around as we want. Right, so it's another very easy visual way to instantly see the redactions that have been done. But that being said, this one that we made is intentionally kind of trivially poorly done. More real-world examples will use slightly more sophisticated methods that require kind of running the gamut and trying this whole round. So let's look at this contract that came out a couple of years ago between the European Union and the big pharmaceutical AstraZeneca. This went out on the official EU site. We just downloaded it here for you in case there are issues with the internet. But this is a live contract that went out, I think, at the end of 2020. As we're scrolling through it, we see that there's a few redactions here and there. And then we get to this page. Right, everything is blanked out. So let's try running through kind of our bag of tricks that we just talked about. We'll click the content panel. We can start analyzing the PDF based on page. We see that this is page number 4. Let's pop over there. And here we see that there are no image fields, which means that the redactions have not been done using images, which is good for the redactors, bad for us. And then we also see that the text fields don't actually have anything beyond the plain text. For instance, we see section 1.15, we see the text field there, and there's nothing else, right? Everything is redacted. Okay, so looking at the content didn't help us in any way, right? We tried to find for images that we could move out of the way. We tried to find if the text fields were actually still there. They're not. Obviously, if we also try to copy and paste the content, nothing will show up. See, we can't even select it. So what do we do next? We could, again, try going to edit, right? And we could see if we could edit the actual bars. We can go ahead and try to resize it a little bit, rotate it out of the way, see if there's anything underneath. There is not. So for all intents and purposes, we think that this is a good redacted document based on what we've just done. Does anyone have any other ideas for how we can start poking into this? That's true. We could pop open a hex editor, kind of dive deeper, even deeper into it. But really, Adobe's content feature is more or less a glorified kind of prepackaged GUI hex editor. So really, when you're messing with the content feature, there's really no need to use the third-party hex editors, or we could use, independent. We could use the Poplar library, attempt to decompile the PDF into its bare elements. So, there's Poplar, which we won't be showing here, but it's a basic command line utility which can decompile the PDF and produce all the independent images, text fields, etc., in a nice little output. So there's other tools we could use, but I can tell you they will not help us with this right now. Any other guesses? So kind of the fundamental lesson that we wanted to show here is we kind of started off with kind of doing an advanced analysis, going into content, analyzing all the dynamics, all the different fields of a PDF. But really, there's a very basic feature that was overlooked by the people making the PDF, and based on the different PDF Alrighty, nice. Alrighty, so just to repeat what I was saying is a complex PDF such as this, it has a convoluted structure. We have section 1, headings, subheadings. PDF printers, when they produce PDFs, try to make this easier to browse by creating an automated bookmark output. And traditionally, the way that a PDF printer is supposed to work when it produces bookmarks is it copies the headings and the subheadings, right, to make a basic tree structure. So we should be able to go and see definitions 1.1 in here, but here we start noticing something interesting is that this PDF printer didn't just produce the headings and the subheadings, it actually confused the subheadings for subheading titles. So instead of just 1.1 accounting standards, we see the entire sentence. That's interesting. Let's see if we go back down to 1.15. Cost of goods. You know, what do we have here? We have, once again, the PDF software assumed that the subheading consisted of the entire phrase in that line, and most interestingly, it then proceeded to repeat that same assumption because the text is formatted exactly the same for the remainder of the entire page. Right? So actually, all of the redacted page that was posted on the EU site is perfectly accessible simply in the bookmarks panel, right? So we didn't even have to go digging into the contents of the file. We didn't have to extract it in hex. We didn't have to use Poplar. We didn't have to extract images. We didn't have to do anything. Literally, all you had to do was look at the bookmarks tab. Now, this is sometimes less obvious because when you view a PDF, if the PDF is set to page only, not just bookmarks panel and page, the bookmarks tab won't be automatically open, so you may forget to open it. But that's something to always go and check is, hey, maybe the redacted data was actually left over there. And at the end of this, we'll show you guys how to do proper redactions and proper document sanitization. But really what seems to have happened here is whoever made the PDF went ahead and ran a redaction software, maybe even Adobe's own redaction, but then they didn't run the sanitization feature, which is a whole separate section in Acrobat. So in the lesson that we'll show at the end of this is when you're redacting a PDF, after you run the redaction tool, you also really need to run the document sanitization tool because there's all this ancillary or complementary data that's tantamount to protecting your redactions, but if you don't take care of that, it will show up. And that's exactly what happened here. Alrighty, now let's move on to another example. So this is, again, another real-world example. It's a court document. It is the deposition of Christine Maxwell in one of the Epstein cases from a couple years ago. And this is a huge document, so we made a little note of where pages are. So let's see. Let's start with page 135. So this was a deposition. Again, it was posted on Pacer, which is a website where I'm sure some of you are familiar, where you could get court documents. So again, this is all publicly posted, an official document. And here we see that there's a number of redactions here. So let's go ahead and try looking at our usual bag of tricks. And let's see what will happen again. We could go ahead and just jump to editing the PDF. We see that we can select the little element here. Let's go ahead and shift it out of the way. And you see there's nothing there once again. And I'm not going to waste time going through the content pane again. I'll just tell you that once again, the redactions have been done there as well. Let's try bookmarks. Can we get any luck with the bookmarks there? Can't copy and paste. Bookmarks are all clean. They got us, right? They did everything that they were supposed to do. They properly both redacted and sanitized the document. But now let's hop over to the index 435, I think. Oh, go up a little bit. So here we have the PDF. Again, they use some other software to automatically generate an index because, when you have a 400-odd page document, it's good to have an index in there somewhere. And here we see that there's an instance of a word below clients that seems to have been redacted and appears in all these numbers of pages. Can anyone think of a word that starts with CLI that could be a person, place, or thing that would be implicated in the Epstein documents? Any ideas? Clinton. Okay, that's a good theory. I wonder if we could test it. So the index conveniently shows us that the term appears on page 134, which is where we just were. It also subsequently appears on the next page, 135, which will actually be 136 in the PDF because it's offset by 1. And sure enough, here we see on page 135, line 7 and line 11, the word Clinton appears. So let's go up to a page earlier to where our redacted document was. And let's see, according to the index, the term also appears on page 134, line 15 and 16. Was blank ever at any Jeffrey Epstein's homes? And as we know from the previous page, that same term appears on the unredacted line as in the redacted line, so we could deduce the redaction there actually says President Clinton, right? And reporters have actually gone through this document and been able to find very many of the proper names that were redacted simply because the indexing software that was used did not proceeded to index everything, but then the redaction was run after, and the redaction was done manually, right? So someone went through this document, looked for Clinton, redacted it, and then missed some pages, or in some pages where that information wasn't sensitive, right? Forgetting that actually the index contained all instances of the term. So again, nothing technical was required here. All we had to do was analyze the index to be able to find the redaction. So even though the redactions were done perfectly on a technical level, right? They didn't have any bookmarks, they didn't have any underlying text, they didn't use images to hide the redaction bar, they completely sanitized the document, but they simply forgot to check the index marginalia, which revealed the names through process of elimination, right? So that's, again, the purpose of these examples is to show you that sometimes this work is not technical at all. You could go through the various technical minutiae and you could still end up with a document that has sensitive information in it. And Kenny's now going to talk about the next example, which doesn't have to do with redactions at all because there's really no way to redact the other data, but we'll talk about how to open it up later.
Sure. So how many of you guys attended last year and went to our session on whistleblowers? Anybody by chance? A couple of you? Apologies, it's going to be a slight repeat of a few things in here, but it's worthwhile to bring up. So PDFs, as Nikita was saying, you can redact things and take it out, but there's also other ways that you can find identifying information in PDF documents. So I'm not going to open up this document. It doesn't really work that well on the internet here, but we browsed to it earlier. It's an NSA document that was released a while back. And what's interesting about this is if you take a look at it, everything looks to be redacted, it looks fine, but there's also a lot of other information or some more specific information that you can glean from this outside of metadata. Does anybody have any ideas what it might be?
So we won't go through the hassle of going through the gamut of redactions. They're done well, but there are other tells in this PDF. So for the first major tell is that this isn't an actual, what we call a true PDF, right, which has vectored images, font, text. This is an image, right? This is
A scanned image. Yeah.
Exactly. And that in itself is a big tell when you're doing this kind of document analysis.
And you can tell things are a little bit crooked. You know, there's some scanned image from the scanner. So we'll zoom in. It'll be a little evident in a moment. We'll zoom in real quick, and we'll come to the upper corner. Does anybody see anything in the upper corner? Maybe, maybe not.
You see the little discoloration from the scan page, the printed page that was subsequently scanned.
Let's,
See if we can
hold
see
on.
anything else in there.
Let me take a quick screenshot of just this upper corner. How the hell do you take a screenshot of this thing? There we go. Okay, quick screenshot, and then I will open it up in Photoshop. So any photo editor, I happen to have Photoshop here. So we'll get it in here. We'll make it a little bit bigger for everybody. So to make it easier, let's just try to make a few adjustments on it. So we'll go over to the adjustments menu, and then we're going to...
Some of you are already starting to notice it, but there's ways that we can make this even more apparent.
So
Let's
we'll
keep going.
we'll invert it. Anybody see anything now? Probably not. It really gets hard on these projector screens. So another thing that you can do is go mess with the contrast and brightness. So we'll go turn the brightness way up and then the contrast way down. And can anybody see the little... Boy, that's really hard. There's little blue... Really?
Again, the joys of a projector light.
But you can see all the little dots, the little yellow dots that are coming. These are called microdots, and these are things that are generated when it's printed out. So each individual printer will print things out sometimes, depends on the printer model, but these will be on the document. And then, you know, not really something that you can easily see when you bring it up. You can
And so that little pattern of dots that we saw actually forms a unique serial number that can identify both when the document was printed, by which username it was printed, the precise time that it was printed at. And if we use the generator on the website, you can actually plug the sequence of dots in and then get a readout of exactly when it was done.
You can see them a little better if you zoom in.
And so again, go back to the original PDF. Yep, so again, borderline imperceptible unless you know what to look for, right? So when we talk about secrets in PDF files, sometimes it's not actually germane to the structure of the PDF. It's actually has to do with the document itself that was imported into the PDF without thinking about anything that could happen. And really the solution to this is then how do we prevent microdots from showing up? There's random GitHub scripts that you could find which can kind of help you normalize the contrast in the document and remove all of that background shadowing and so on. They're tentatively effective, but really the best way to do this kind of work if you're reproducing a sensitive document is you really have to recreate the document from scratch. Right, that's kind of one of the underlying themes, if you haven't noticed, that's running through the undercurrents of all the examples is PDF structure is insanely convoluted, right? There's so many ways that you could trip up and accidentally expose metadata. So really the best way to reproduce something like this is to just retype it completely from scratch. It requires obviously a lot of work, right? Because you're not just OCRing and copying and pasting text. We literally mean retyping it from scratch. But that work is actually worth it if you want to make sure that you strip out any secrets in a PDF file. Old school.
Back on the microdots too. If you go to this website, if you take the tedious time to go through, you can go and put all the little dots in, and you see them in your document. Does that work? No, not yet. Maybe. So if you take the time to go through and put all these little dots in here matching the document, you can get information from the printer, such as serial number, model, all this good stuff, date and time when it was printed. So, with enough time and effort, you can find out a lot of information about the different files. And we can send this link out too afterwards.
Yep. So there's an old school NSA or CIA redaction manual from the 70s that talks about the best, before PDFs were a thing, that talks about the best way of redacting, which is still very much true today, is to cut the piece of paper. Right? Literally cut out what you're trying to prevent from seeing because, before PDFs, the way that we would undo redactions instead of messing with them is you would hold it up to the light, and if someone just redacted something with a Sharpie on one side, you would still be able to read through on the other side of the paper, right? So, FOIA agents who work with releasing Freedom of Information Act, stuff that's redacted, et cetera, they typically used to use whiteout, right? Well, what happens to whiteout when it dries? It could easily be just scraped off. Right? And that's how people used to find old records before all this. And really the same kind of analog approach of making sure that the data is not in the source is the best way of making sure that you can't undo digital redactions. What this means is that you should not wait to redact a file when it is already in PDF form. If you're redacting contents when you have already converted them to PDF, you've already failed. The redaction has to be done in the source content. So let's say you're working in a Word doc. Right? What you want to go through is replace the actual word in the Word doc with like a set of X's to maintain the proper spacing and stuff, or you could actually pad it with additional X's to make it seem like the word you're redacting is much bigger than it actually is. Right? Let's say you're redacting a 4-character name, right? And you want it to appear like the name is actually much longer. Go back to your source document, fill it up with 10 X's, and then redact that field so that now the data actually looks like there's no way that it just said Mike or something like that. Right? No, this was a big name. And that's kind of what you have to do in the original source document is make sure that the material is not in the actual document before you convert it to a PDF. But that being said, lots of the times folks do convert documents to PDF and the need to redact it. So now we'll walk you guys through how to redact an actual document. We'll skip to that after. So let's go back to our now mangled example here, which was the contract. If we go back to Tools, and go ahead to Edit a PDF, here at the bottom we see the option to redact a document. And remember earlier I mentioned that redaction and sanitization are two different functions in Acrobat. This document has already been redacted, but we can go ahead and just add another redaction over here. Why not go ahead and hit Apply. And here we have the second feature, sanitize and remove hidden information. The reason we want to do that is because when you decide to remove sanitized information, you can remove all this other data that's available. And what's the first field here? Bookmarks. So what happened, in other words, is when whoever was redacting this document, they did the redaction function, but then they did not go and subsequently sanitize the document, which we can go ahead and do. And this happens too, because again, a live demo, and we just manipulated the whole thing to be out of bounds. Did it save it?
Didn't ask to.
It didn't ask to.
In theory, once you redact it, it should ask you to save it as a new file somewhere, and then it'll save the new redacted file in a different directory or wherever you choose, keeping the original one.
Yep, so this one had an error with flattening. That's because we messed around with the PDF. But really what would happen is the bookmarks would be gone. And in fact, they already seem like they're gone. Let's double check. Yep. So the bookmarks are no longer in the document. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that you both have to sanitize and redact. And then, again, we've been using Acrobat, and people are like, but, I use favorite PDF editor XYZ to do this. You want to mention why that might not be a good idea?
Sure. So there's a lot of studies done that when you do redacting, y'all can hear me on this, right? Yeah. When you do redacting with these other programs, there's data that could be leaked out. Here's a study that was done. You scroll down talking about the different PDF editors out there. I can't remember where it was. Here it is. I think there's over a dozen, and I'll make this a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. Over a dozen different PDF editors, and with the redaction, the information that's actually leaked out when you do that and is available. So just because it's a editor of your choice doesn't mean it's necessarily the best one. We're using Acrobat. In fact, I got the free trial of Pro just to show you guys this one. Don't particularly feel like paying for it. It's on my company laptop. But Acrobat is the most comprehensive, the easiest one to use, and does kind of the best job of ripping everything out and not sharing data, such as mentioned over here.
Exactly. So that's the thing, is like you could use any number of PDF editors to manipulate the data and such, but sometimes the third-party ones are a little unreliable. But that being said, Acrobat itself can be unreliable, because how does Acrobat identify which fields to remove, right? In a PDF syntax, the text fields are clearly delineated, the images are, the bookmarks are, and so on. The problem is that lots of PDF printers don't follow the PDF guidelines to a T. That means if something in a PDF printer that you use to create the PDF document is not clearly marked, for example, as an author field, it will not get stripped when Acrobat starts looking for an author field. And so there's been cases in the past where, again, people have run the sanitization tool, the redaction tool, but because the text was not clearly formatted, that text survived the manipulation. And that's, again, kind of why we say that you should not rely on software-based solutions when the document is in a PDF to run that redaction. This should be done beforehand to make sure that when you open up the PDF, there's nothing there to remove in the first place. And then kind of in tandem with not using random third-party tools, which may or may not work, everything nowadays is cloud-based, right? There's tons of editors online where you could upload a PDF. It says it strips the metadata for you. It says it checks for redactions for you, and then gives you a clean output. And let's say that that output is done properly, it is clean. The issue, of course, now is that the cloud provider has your unredacted PDF, right? They may say whatever they want, that, we promise we won't keep the file, we promise that we delete the file within 7 days, but really, whenever you use any online tool, just assume that your file now belongs to someone else, right? You're no longer the owner of that file. So that's another reason why we're using Acrobat and not random standalone pdfredactor.com, right? Because there's no telling whether online services will actually keep the unredacted version or not. I think, yeah, and that's more or less it. If folks have questions. Thank you, guys. All right, I think we'll start in the very back. Someone had a question? The legality of doing proper, so that's actually an interesting point, because there's the legality of working with the redactions, right? Like I mentioned, we're working with all public documents, right? These were on the official court website. On Pacer, they were accessible through court records. The other one was accessible on the EU site. So for us, there's no liability. But this brings an interesting question if there's liability for whoever the redactors were, right? When you're doing, for example, a FOIA request, the government is legally obligated to redact particular kinds of PII or personally identifiable information. If there's not, that actually opens up, and again, just to make it clear, we're not lawyers, we're not advising on anything legal, but that does open up the question of whether, if any PII is revealed in the document, the person or individuals whose PII is revealed, if they now have a venue to go after the person who put up the document improperly. So that's where the legality lies, not on the analysis, but on the ones who failed at their jobs to protect people's information. Up here.
So you were talking about working with the original document, Word document, for example, and making modifications there before converting to PDF. If you don't have access to Word, is there any problem with taking PDF, doing a conversion to Word, doing modifications, then creating PDF out of that?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, if you don't have access to the original Word document, but you have an access to the PDF, can you go backwards? Can you convert that PDF to a Word document and then back to a PDF? And yeah, that's a great point. You can definitely do that, and that will, for the most part, strip out anything, because when you convert it back to Word, bookmarks don't get preserved. The original content structure doesn't get preserved. Like Word, in a sense, is flattening the document back out. So you could definitely do that, redact and then convert back to PDF. There may just be practical issues, like the formatting won't quite match up. Like in a complex document like this, when you have a table, when you convert it back to Word, there might be issues. But in theory, yeah, that's a great approach, is if you don't have the document, recreate the original Word document itself as well. The other issue, though, is that when we were talking, for example, about the example with the microdots, if you were to recreate that in Word, when you export it into PDF, or so when you export it from PDF into Word, whether or not Word keeps the images, right, that background image, or whether Word just keeps the pure text. So that's just something to keep an eye out for, is if the conversion kept the images or removed the images, because otherwise you would not see it. And this kind of goes back to the broader point we raised earlier about, if you want a completely clean document, you really have to recreate it from scratch, right? You can't start taking shortcuts like copying text, converting it to a format. You literally have to sit down and retype it, because there's other forms of watermarkings that we didn't go through, because it's kind of outside the scope of this, that would survive reproducibility like that. One sector is called NLW, or natural language watermarks. This is, for instance, when two versions of a text document have different wording. Like this version of a PDF might say, "Yesterday I went to the park." Right? And you download it, you think that you copied it over, there's nothing there, but actually your coworker may have received a different version of the document that says, "I went to the park yesterday," right? So that word was transfixed from the start of the line to the end of the line. If you do enough modifications like that, you can easily make a serial number that uniquely identifies a document that's preserved by the text order itself. So any number of manipulation, copying it into a Word, moving it back to a PDF, et cetera, that will preserve the word order. So you have to be careful about situations like that. But great question. Yes, someone up front. Yep.
So, I understand you mentioned, recreating the whole document. Definitely the best option, but since those were microdots, I'm assuming they're really small, so scanning the document at a lower resolution, would that would obviously not be as effective, would that at least be somewhat effective at getting rid of microdots showing up?
Yes, but at a cost, right? Is the lower resolution, you get the grainier, the text itself, the grainier the images.
Although
So-
they're pretty small, I would think that it would be. I'm not saying we do this, but like it seems like they must have been scanning at a really high resolution for those to even show up. I feel like they could.
It's the NSA. They have a lot of money.
But yes, the point is you can do that, but kind of when you're relying on that kind of the damaging the original source, number one, you're decreasing the quality of the material that you're later working with, and also number two, you then have to go back, of course, and double check that what you're doing actually removes it or not. But yes, in general, if the robustness factor of a watermark, which is how resilient it is to these kind of transportation attacks, is not that high, then yeah, you could always decrease something to a lower resolution. The same principle applies to audio files and so on and so forth. But their survivability is a question that you would have to look at thoroughly. Yes?
Isn't the microdots like a security feature for the printer? So even if you lower your resolution for the scan, the printer should still print out high quality microdots because it's a security feature, not necessarily.
Well, I mean it's printed off the printer and then you scan it potentially off something else. So the printer has no idea what you're going to scan it at when you print it.
Right. So again, once you, like in that sequence, after you're done printing, you then scan. You could scan at a low resolution, but again, the dots may survive. So really, the point is that really the overarching point of this talk delivered at a tech conference is that you cannot rely on tech, right? You have to do manual resolution. We all love to have whatever the latest shiny GitHub script is. Like if you Google microdots GitHub, there's at least 5 different scripts that claim to remove these, right? All it would take a researcher to do is to see what the threshold is for the scripts and lower that threshold by 0.1. And then the dots will now survive, right? So we cannot rely on technological solutions when we're dealing with finding secrets or removing secrets. It has to be an analog, manual, tedious process, even though that's counterintuitive to so many of us here, right, who just want to automate this thing. Yes. Yes, in the middle there.
Curious question about whether or not, let's say like HP multifunction printer scanners, if they're actually preserving or embedding microdots in scans as well, or is it only tend to be, do we only know it to be printers themselves?
We know for a fact that printers do it, but that's kind of not an exclusive set, right? So definitely scanners, basically any device that is compromised for requirements to have microdots is under suspect that it would introduce something else in the thing. So photocopiers, for example, traditionally introduced imperfections that weren't kind of intentional like this, but they would still let someone know which exact model of photocopier was used. And this was done to prevent currency counterfeiting. And so it wouldn't, again, introduce dots, but it would introduce imperfections, right? So you would notice, like, let's say the line gets a little bit wavy on the top right corner or something like that. And that wave imperfection would be enough to identify not the exact time and date that document was printed, but the exact model that document was printed on, and so on and so forth. So yeah, scanners, there's no kind of definitive proof like we have for printers that they embed microdots, but it's certainly something that when we're like doing a threat model, right, for scanning a sensitive document, that should definitely be something that's under that consideration. Great question. Yes.
Wouldn't that information be the metadata anyway for a scan?
Yeah, it could be in the metadata, but kind of the point here also with watermarking and just with general secrecy in PDF files is lots of this stuff is redundant, right? Just like we have redundant ways of looking at it and removing it, there's also redundant ways of embedding that information. So you may think that, yeah, you know, that information is in the metadata. I can easily remove metadata with like a single command using a tool like EXIF tool, and then you think that you're good, right? But then you have the microdots. And conversely, if you're overly fixated on the microdots and then forget the metadata, then you're cooked that way, which is, again, kind of goes to show you that there's this recursive structure of constantly hiding data within a convoluted architecture like a PDF file. And once again, that's why we can't rely on simple technological solutions, right? We can't just say, remove the metadata, sanitize, and redact the PDF, right? We have to go beyond that and make sure that the source document doesn't have anything in the first place. So what that means concretely in this example, for example, is that you would not be scanning it, right? You would not be even printing it out for that matter. You would be writing what you see on a screen, right? That's kind of, again, the underlying point here is that there are, no, just to emphasize yet again, there are no technological backends that can let us bypass all of this. There are no shortcuts. If you look online nowadays, a website where, in fact, this document itself was hosted called Document Cloud or Muckrack, what they offer is an online redaction service where you can upload a hypersensitive PDF, do the redactions, and then post the clean version online, and they claim that, you know, they don't retain a copy of the redacted document, that the document is overwritten by the unredacted one, and it's like, who knows, right? You're basically entrusting their word and your security and the security of the source who gave you the document on the claims of this random website, right? So again, we really want to emphasize the manual approach to all this stuff. Any other questions? Oh, back there. So the question was, when you receive a PDF and you want to check if it has already been sanitized, is there any way that you could tell? The answer is no, there's no kind of like in the metadata sanitized equals yes function, not like that. But there are a couple flags that you could run through. For example, if you view the document properties in a sanitized document, all the stuff down here will be blank. The producer, right, application, the modified date, the application data, obviously the author, the title, it will all be blank. And if you go subsequently go to additional metadata in advanced, there will be nothing here. Like here we would see all the different fields, the instance ID, the user ID, all this good stuff. In a sanitized document, if you were to open this up, it would be completely blank. So that's kind of one tell, but there's no kind of set way, there's no flag that says yes, sanitized. Any other questions? Great, then thank you everyone for coming, and we hope you picked something up.